Team Chimewing took its inspiration from Pendragon. We decided we could make a game about Boudica's Revolt using Pendragon's board, some of its pieces, some dice, some counters, and if we added some of our own cards, a few counters, and a new rule set, we could come up with something pretty convincing. Boudica's Revolt took place around 60 or 61 CE, and for as long as it lasted, it caused Emperor Nero to seriously consider entirely abandoning Britain. Boudica attracted considerable support, particularly in the east of the country, and 3 towns, including Londinium, were burnt to the ground. There was slaughter and plunder, the destruction of at least 1 legion, and Roman rule appeared to be on the brink of collapse. However, as many of you will already know, Boudica's army was destroyed by the Romans at the Battle of Watling Street, and the rebellion was quelled. Our game is a coin-like game, a scenario of sorts, or an expansion of sorts to Pendragon, and it uses many of the same design features. The basic pattern of play, event cards, which you'll see down here, the asymmetric player actions, and the victory conditions. It's a 2-player game, and it uses the initiative track that we first saw in Colonial Twilight, which you can see here. However, there are considerable differences from the base game. The events that are represented in Boudica's Revolt took place over a far shorter period of time, possibly a year, maybe even less. Given that Pendragon is representing events that occur at a different scale with several decades passing, and it's essentially modelling something like quite different from the very intense but brief conflagration of this revolt. So we knew we had to mix things up a bit. Our game isn't about the Romans managing a simmering rebellion under the surface. Our game is about a rebellion that ignites with startling speed into a militarily acute crisis. We're using 115 wooden pieces from the base game. There are red and green cubes to represent Roman auxiliary troops and legions. The green triangle or pie-shaped cubes become auxiliary cavalry. Red forts represent Roman occupied towns. Black forts, which you'll see down here, represent burnt-out towns. Blue cubes of both shades are Britain's war bands, and blue forts, of which there are 3 on the board, are Britain's hill forts. And then finally there is the Druid stronghold on Mona. We're also using 35 of the base game counters, and 4 of its dice, and then some other wooden tokens and pawns on the scoring track. The biggest change obviously are the cards. We've added 24 event cards in this deck here, and then there are 2 scoring cards called Nero Decides, at which point in the game, when those are drawn, you will check the victory conditions. And then there are 4 cards each called core cards, 4 for each player, and these cards add particularly powerful effects, which we'll touch on later. There's also 1 sticker required, which goes on one of the blue cubes. We've used a gold star that represents Boudica herself. So in terms of the mechanics, the 2 factions have differing conceptual values and that are quite asymmetric, and there are different means for increasing and decreasing these values through the game. The Romans' 2 values that they're interested in are resources and prestige. They increase their resources by passing or by playing events, and they increase their prestige by engaging in battle, repairing burnt out settlements, and again through event cards. Resources can be decreased through mustering, marching, repairing settlements, using beacons and calling on cavalry, and prestige is decreased by battle, loss in battle, plunder of their settlements, or loss of their wealth, and again through events. The Britons, on the other hand, are interested only in renown, and they increase this through passing, through playing events, and through burning out Roman settlements. They decrease this renown by rallying, swarming, and through playing at some events. In terms of victory conditions, the Romans need to have high control and prestige value. This isn't about dominating spaces with superior. This is about dominating spaces with superior numbers of military units, not having too much of their plunder pillaged, and through winning battles. The Britons need to have a high renown value, and this is about burning out towns, pillaging, stealing, and winning battles. There are also 2 automatic victory conditions in the game. If the Britons burn down 6 settlements at one time, so there are 6 black settlements out on the map and not on their board, then they are victorious. And if the Romans manage to track down and kill Boudica, then they win immediately. So in terms of the sequence of play we saw earlier, this is the initiative track, and we're using the 2-player coin sequence of play. This provides you with all of the actions that can be performed, apart from those that are shown on these core cards, which can be quite game-changing. At the start of the game, each player will be able to choose 2 from these 4 cards at random, and they will sit in their hand and provide them with the opportunity to take some very radical actions, such as adding a legion from Rome at the expense of prestige, or potentially persuading the Brigantes to side with Boudica in the rebellion against Rome. The cards, the player aid cards, show in detail all of the commands and feats that are available to the 2 sides. The Romans can muster, march, or enter battle as their commands, or they can repair, use beacons, or call on cavalry as feats, whereas the Britons can rally, swarm, and battle as commands, and they can pillage, ambush, and call on war chariots as their feats. Combat is resolved using dice, and there are some quite detailed instructions here, and also in the rules that goes into that in more detail. The outcome can be severely affected by the presence of either Suetonius Paulinus or Boudica. Setup is also very different from Pendragon. We've deemed the northern part of the country to be essentially out of play, apart from potentially Brigantes. And the game begins with Boudica's rebellion poised to erupt, and the Roman legions are dispersed around the country or in North Wales fighting the Druids. The game tasked the Britons with embarking on a whirlwind of pillage and destruction, attempting to rally warbands to the cause, whilst deciding whether to bleed the Roman military to death by 1,000 cuts, or to risk everything on the outcome of a culminating battle. The Romans must choose between concentrating their defence or dispersing it, relying on a few powerful legions or the more numerous but less effective auxiliaries. They must decide how many towns and how much plunder to sacrifice for strategic position. They must also decide whether to hunt down Boudica or let her reveal herself, and all of this before the Emperor decides whether to abandon this wild rain-sodden island at the end of the earth.